Hello, welcome back to the Roker Rapport podcast. Sorry, the Xtra podcast even. We've got a little extra dose of depression this week, as it seems to be, from myself. We've got Bolton away on Tuesday. We've got the Borough at home on the Saturday. I've got to be honest, I much prefer the idea of speaking to a Bolton fan than I do a Borough fan, but I won't hold any prejudice. How do we discuss Saturday? I've summed it up as best as I can in an article that's hopefully going out in the next few days. It might be out already by the time you're listening to this, but that was gravely depressing, wasn't it? I'm not very confident going into Tuesday. I haven't been confident much all season. I tried to get myself up for Saturday and I didn't quite manage it, if I'm honest with you. But nonetheless, you can't turn your back on the club at any point, I don't think. And based on the game that we have on Tuesday, I've got Ed from the Lion of Vienna Suite, who is not very well, so I'm being told. How are you doing, Ed?
Yeah, not the best, but I'm going to soldier on through.
Good. I'm proud of you doing that. I'm very proud of you. Most people wouldn't. What's up with you this week? How are you feeling? There's a cold, flu?
Yeah, a bit of the flu, yes. All weekend kind of thing, so it's not the best.
Did you get to go to the match on Saturday, or did you miss that?
Oh, I missed that completely. There was no chance I was paying £35 to go to London, plus £60 for the train, plus beer money, plus food money, plus other things, just to see us lose. It's not worth it.
I get where you're coming from with that. Yeah. I think Sunderland fans will empathise with that as well. Mm-hmm. I was looking through sort of your last... I always tend to look at like your last 5 or 6 results, and I'll be honest with you, Bolton, Barnsley, Birmingham, teams around us, Burton, you naturally keep an eye on them more so than maybe the mid-table league. So I feel like I've got a bit more know-how about Bolton itself in regards to how you've been doing recently. But I actually thought you'd been doing a little bit better recently. But take out the Bristol City game, you seem... Are you missing Gary Madine?
I think Phil Parkinson's still unsure of where to go tactically since he left, because he was the complete focal point of the team. We kind of badged the ball up to him and he kind of knocked it down for bring others into play, and he was kind of the main attacking threat, and he scored all our goals, really. He got 10 goals and I think 5 assists, so he was far and away the most creative player and a top goal scorer. So we've kind of struggled since then to try and adapt, and we've not scored any more than a goal a game since he's left, which is troubling, really. Yeah.
Talk me through the game on Saturday so I don't have to talk about hours. I noticed it was, obviously you got beat off QPR, which, no offence to QPR fans here, but I think getting beat 2-0 off QPR for anyone in this league, it sounds depressing, doesn't it? QPR is one of those teams that just seem to be stumbling along, doing nothing. And I think, you went down to 10 men, of course, but how was Saturday? Was it good? Was it terrible? Was it depressing?
I mean, the way Bolton were playing, it was like QPR or Barcelona, really. They were passing us off the park and completely bullying us in the air as well. Matt Smith basically played like Gary Madine was playing for us before he left. He had the beating of Wheater and Beavers all game, and we couldn't deal with the physicality. Normally Bolton are such a physical side, but we just looked downbeat completely. And I don't think the sending off implicated us. I don't think it mattered too much in the game. I think even if we still had 11 men on the pitch, I think we would have lost. I think it's just an excuse to say, we went down to 10 men. That's the reason we lost. But I don't think it was. I think it was a game where Matt Smith was having so many chances and they were having so many efforts in the box and shots on goal. It was only a matter of time before they got that goal and we lost the game.
I did watch the game against Bristol City, and I watched it with intent to hopefully see you struggling a little bit, truth be told, because of Madine going. And as a Sunderland fan, at the moment, you've got to cling on to any sort of hope that the teams around us are not going to be doing the business. And I remember watching it and I thought, well, they'll struggle without Madine, which it turns out it has. But I was actually really impressed with you against Bristol City. I thought you played really well. What's changed since then? Was that just like one of those games where your players upped the game to show they weren't like a one-man team and you've since like reverted to type? Or
I think it's a little of that. I think it was, in front of the Sky cameras, you're trying to show the rest of the championship, we're not just a one-man team. And Phil Parkinson trying to show he's not a one-note manager. He doesn't need a target man to win a game, because we hadn't won a game without Madine since April 2016. It was a pretty ridiculous start. So I think it was more of a statement and intent that we don't need Madine to win a game, and which is brilliant. And then I think since then, the Fulham game, we're unlucky. I mean, we were lucky to get a point, but we could have won the game easily. We had the chances to, and I think, I think it's just maybe the Sky cameras give the Bolton players that little push to go for the win. And I think maybe that, we've struggled since then because we're not on, we don't have that statement of intent.
Yeah, I think since then you had the 1-1 draw with Fulham at home. The game before the Bristol City game was a 1-1 draw with Ipswich. You've got Cardiff, which is, you lost to Cardiff, which is no great shame if I'm honest. We got hammered 4-0, and they're one of those teams that they just don't look very good, but you know what? They're so effective in what they do, and Warnock's obviously so experienced and putting the side out that can just do the job, and he always has teams near promotion. Love him or hate him, Warnock knows what he's doing. But there's not a great deal of winning there, is there, really, aside from that Bristol City game? But I thought you had a bit of an upturn in form, but I suppose, going back to the start of the season, looking at Bolton, I remember just before we played you, before obviously Grayson got sacked, when we drew 3-3, and I suppose we looked at the Bolton game as like, this is the game he has to win because Bolton can't beat anyone, which it was at that point to an extent. But then you look at where you are in the league compared to where we are. We've had obviously a change in manager, a good manager, who I think everyone would back that as well. Most people would agree with me that Coleman's the right man, maybe at the wrong club. Bolton have so many issues, though, much like Sunderland, but you seem to be able to compete in this league. You're picking up 1-1 draws here and there. We just seem to be getting beat by half time, as it has been for a few weeks now. What is it that kind of reinvigorated Bolton at that point when you looked pretty much dead and buried around October time, if we're truthful?
I think it was Phil Parkinson, really. I think we had a massive loss to Borough at the end of September, and then there was a 2-week international break. And I think during that time, Sammy Amiobi and Josh Vella came back into training because they'd been out injured for a while. And I think it was Parkinson working with the team for a couple of weeks and working on tactics and training. And we came out against Sheffield Wednesday at the start of October after the international break, and we got the first win, and it was like a monkey off our back. And since then, form's been pretty good, really. In the grand, obviously the last 2 games haven't been great, but before the last 2 games against Cardiff and QPR, I think we were 11th in the table. Since if the table started in October, we've been 11th. So it's a weird thing, really, because we looked dead and buried before, like in the first 2 months, but since then we've been a mid-table side on form, and I think that's down to Phil Parkinson and the way he's working with the team on the training ground and the tactics, really.
And it's odd with Bolton. The same sort of happened with Birmingham. We had the game with Bolton at home, which obviously were, if I'm honest with you, I felt like Bolton were probably the better side, but we seemed to score from every shot we had. Yeah. And obviously we had Graben in which we could actually score. But I remember Bolton coming to the stadium and everyone thought it's a chance to win. Like, with all due respect, you looked dead and buried at that point. We seen it as a winnable game. And we weren't wretched, but we weren't good that night. And obviously the manager lost his job because the performance just wasn't there. And Birmingham came and did the same. Birmingham looked dead and buried at one point, and they came to the stadium and were a better team again. Do you think? And one thing I found interesting about Bolton is what Carl Henry came out and said about the Stadium of Light. Now, some people took it wrong, some people took it right, some people were a bit peed off with it, if I'm honest with what you said about coming to the Stadium like being like an easy thing. But I think most people, if we're honest, can agree with that. Did you happen to come to the Stadium like for the game by any chance? I know it was midweek, so
yeah, I did, yeah. I think he kind of had a point, really. I think because it had been so long since you'd won at home, it was kind of toxic, and similar to how we played away. We've only won once in the Championship in the last 2.5 years. So, and before, when we came to the stadium, we hadn't won at all in 30 games away from home in the Championship. So it was kind of the team who can't win, who've literally not won away from home in 30 games versus the team who've not won at home in 10 months. Yeah. And I think that played into our hands a little bit. If we'd been a little better defensively, we probably would have come away with the win, because I think your fans were very quick to turn on the side when it wasn't going your way. There's a lot of games, you've seen it on Match of the Day last season, where you go 2 down before half time, or against the team, and camera pans and there's floods of fans exiting the stadium because you've seen it all before, and you've kind of fed up with it. And I think that definitely probably played into the minds of fans, or the teams who were going to the stadium, like that. All the fans are going to be on their back. We need to capitalise on that.
I'm really pleased you picked up on that. You mentioned about the floods of fans leaving, and I feel like there's a lot of focus on Sunderland fans leaving the ground and not filling the ground in empty seats. And yeah, that's true. I mean, we're still 27 to 30,000 every week for the shite that we're serving up. But at the same time, there is a lot of empty seats, and there is a lot of people that do leave early. But I've picked up on something you said there, and I'm quite pleased you mentioned it. You said because they've seen it all before. I mean, do you understand? Because you've been through very similar. Bolton have had a very similar years of shite, effectively, probably more so than we have. Mm-hmm. But it's funny that you picked up that it wasn't just we weren't just turning our back at the first sign of trouble. We've seen this for a long while. I mean, do you understand why Sunderland fans reacted in the way they do and why it was so toxic when you came up to the stadium? Obviously, you played in your favour, but I'm guessing you understand it, though, yeah?
Yeah, I think it's probably down to the ownership and the fact that, the club does its very best to when you're in the Premier League, to stay up at the last minute, and then it was big celebrations and, you've done amazingly well to stay up, and then a couple months down the line, it's not going well for this certain manager, and then next manager leaves, and then you're kind of struggling again, and it was kind of like a horse that's galloping along, and it needed shooting and it didn't get shot, and then you finally got relegated, and that was the horse being shot, and it's a grim time. Bolton definitely went through the motions like that since Allardyce left in 2007. It's kind of been a downhill. They're just downhill since then, and we can say
the same about that. Since Sam Allardyce has left, what the fuck has happened?
It's the kiss of death, isn't it, when Allardyce leaves?
Yeah. We had him far too short. I mean, the majority of the fan bases, and maybe people disagree with me, but I feel like Allardyce was really well loved, and I think you probably agree with me here. I think Allardyce is severely underrated. You don't realise how tactically clever and how mentally and psychologically clever he is as a manager until you've really got him.
Yeah, absolutely. He always used to boast that he had the best backroom staff in Europe when he was at Bolton because of the variety of talent and knowledge they had that he built for years and years. He's very analytical, and I think the majority of the media just sees him as this big bloke who's plays one-touch football and long football, and someone who plays 20th century football, and he's a lot more than that. He's very analytical, and he's very more knowledgeable than people give him credit for.
Yeah, no, I agree with that. I think with Big Sam, I think the thing I was impressed with was towards the end of his only season that he had at Sunderland, Rafa Benitez came in, and I mean, realistically, Rafa Benitez is a big name, and he came to Newcastle, he got 1 or 2 results, and they were not just our direct rivals because we fucking hate each other, but they were direct rivals for relegation, and they had 80 odd million, I think, or 50 million or something they spent under McLaren, and they brought in Andros Townsend, and they brought in some good players at that point, but he wasn't obvious with it. But I remember Allardyce just very much being Newcastle didn't win this week, and he just dropped little things in the press conference to take the pressure off Sunderland and add it towards sort of Newcastle. And I think that's what annoys a lot of Sunderland fans as well, with when people say, "Oh, Sunderland were ripe to go down when Moyes took over." A lot of people look at it and go, "Oh, what was David Moyes meant to do?" But Allardyce actually fixed it in 6 months, sort of fixed a lot of the crap that was going on for years. He put a backroom staff in. He had the players being happy, and people talk about Allardyce maybe having a few dodgy dealings under the table, but they can't have been that dodgy because I'm sure he would have been caught by this point. I'm sure he's just a little bit savvy to what he's doing. It does kind of fall down when he leaves because you have the likes of Lamine Kone suddenly wanting 70 to 90 grand a week when he's previously on about 30, 40 for 6 months of good football. But I think Allardyce is just a likeable bloke from a fan's perspective and a player's perspective. But technically, he just knows what he's doing. And I mean, the way we fell down when he left was, well, look where we are now. It's catastrophic. And I suppose I did want to touch on, obviously, Bolton as well. And again, all due respect, I think you're right. Bolton did fall down after Allardyce went. Blackburn did exactly the same. Sadly, somehow West Ham are staying afloat, and they've got David Moyes, and I'd love to see them get relegated for the simple fact they've got David Moyes in charge. But I think Allardyce he does build things. It's just a shame how far it falls after it went. I mean, with Bolton, it took a little while though, didn't it, before it kind of fell down with Allardyce. He didn't get relegated straight away. It was 3 or 4 seasons later, I give or take. I think
5 seasons later, I think it was.
5. That's right.
And I think that's more down to the playing squad, maybe, because it wasn't too dissimilar to Allardyce's. Apart from he signed a player before he left called Gerald Sid, who's regarded as the worst player to ever play for Bolton Wanderers. So
CID is that the CID,
yeah,
not SID? Yeah, I remember.
Yes. So a lot of that was Allardyce's parting gift, but I think it worked because Gary Megson was a kind of similar manager, except he didn't have that relationship with the fans that Allardyce did. But I think tactically he was very astute and he was very similar to Sam Allardyce, so it kind of worked for a couple of years. And then Owen Coyle came in and he was the kind of other side of the coin to Gary Megson. He kind of had that relationship with the fans, being an ex-player, but then tactically it kind of fell apart when Stuart Holden got injured, and then that led to relegation. And I think it kind of, debts kind of built up over those 5 years as well, so that didn't help. But yeah, it was a slow process, but it was kind of, as soon as Allardyce left, you could kind of tell over the years that it was leading to one place, and that was relegation.
Yeah, and I think it was weird because Bolton away is one of my favourite places to go. We had that weird period where we'd kind of turn up and you'd be kind of teetering around 14th, 15th. And I remember the Solly Montori game when we scored in the last minute. I'll never know how that went in because it was like a cross, it was a shot, and Zat Knight putting it in the back of the net. But I think the season after that was when you got relegated. And I remember you coming to the Stadium Light and getting a 2-2 draw. But I remember eventually I think you finished third bottom, I think, that season. And you never really came back from that. I mean, you did in the sense you got promoted, obviously, from League One. But I think what Sunderland fans will probably be quite interested in is how it came to manifest that you got into League One, and how grim is it? Did you find you see, with Sunderland fans, some people said the same about going into the Championship. He said, at least we'll win more games, we'll get a bit of pride back, and so on and so forth. The kind of stuff you say to kind of convince yourself that it's going to be all right. But with Sunderland, I think the thing we're worried about is that if we go down into League One, we'll struggle there as well because we're that bad. We are honestly that bad. We're that bad from the top all the way down to the bottom, the playing staff. There's only really the manager and I was going to say the fans, but even we're so apathetic at the moment. It's kind of like almost non-existent. We're there, but it's like a morgue. But I think what Sunderland fans would be interested in is in reference to, obviously, when you went down into League One. I mean, say what you want, Bolton are not a League One club. Never will be, never have been. For me, you've always been either in the Premiership or you've been punching around the playoff places like mid-90s when I was watching football. But going down into League One, how much of not a culture shock, but how was it when you went down? Did you go down apathetic, and how did you find it when you went down? Is it as bad as it feels like it might be for us? Because we're feeling we're going down, truth be told.
Yeah, I mean, the 15-16 season in which we got relegated was a complete disaster because Eddie Davis completely withdrew all funding, and a finance expert was brought in to kind of not save us, but kind of put the club up for sale and try and find new owners. But that didn't work up for 6 months, and it was kind of the things behind the scenes kind of made it inevitable that we were going to get relegated, and the atmosphere around the whole place was, completely at an all-time low. And even when the new owners came in, it was already too late. We were rock bottom of the league. We'd won, I think, 3 or 4 games all season, and it was just, we'd been written off by about January, and I don't think anybody expected us to fight at all. And yeah, so it kind of, I think fans had gotten used to being getting relegated to League One by the January in that season.
Yeah.
And when we were in League One, I think the only positive at the start of the season was that we'd brought in somebody like Phil Parkinson, who was an expert in that league. He'd got Colchester promoted, and he'd had Bradford in and around the playoffs for a couple of years in a row. So it was a real coup for Bolton to get a manager like that. And I don't think any Bolton fans expected us to go up for the first time of asking. I think maybe if you'd said at the end of the season you'll be in the playoffs, snap your hand off, because that would have been pretty fantastic, because the club was in debt, and we've still, 18 months on, we've still not got any more. We've not spent a transfer fee in 3 years. So it was kind of an impossible uphill task to get promoted, which miraculously we did. But I think it's not great when you get relegated to League One, but it was nice being in a league where you go to an away day and you're seeing your team put in a really fantastic performance, and you're actually winning games, and you win games home and away, and there was a real buzz about the place by the end of the season, and I think that's the real high point of the last 5-6 years was the game against Peterborough, the last game of the season last season, finally getting promoted, and that sigh of relief and just celebrating, because it's been a long time since Bolton fans have had anything to celebrate about. And even though it was just, getting promoted from League One to Championship, it's the highest point in the last few years.
But what was it because I imagine a lot of the things you mentioned about ownership and bringing someone in to kind of effectively sell the club, it's essentially what we're going through with Martin Bain at the moment. And he's not a well-liked person, and certainly not by myself. Some people think, he's just doing his job. I don't like him personally. So the mood, even from the guy who's trying to sort the finances out, is not too good. The club as a whole feels kind of dead. I want to give a better word, but it does. But I imagine Bolton probably felt the same. You mentioned to me you felt like you were relegated by January. I think, a lot of fans feel we're relegated now. I don't think we're going to get out of it. And I think everyone would agree with that. What was it that galvanized you? Was it the management or was it the players? What was the change that made Bolton again, if that makes sense?
I think it was just the fact that we started, the off-field problems kind of went away, or kind of disappeared into the background when the new ownership came in, and I think just the fact that we were winning games kind of took precedence among the fans and the players and everyone associated with the club, so that kind of lifted everyone's spirits, and I think that kind of helped. I think when you're in a league where you kind of a bigger fish in a smaller pond and you're actually winning games, it makes all the difference, really.
And do you feel like when you see Sunderland, do you see similarities to Bolton in the 15-16 season? Do you see relative similarities?
I think we were in a much more dire financial situation, but there's definitely parallels, between you getting relegated and us getting relegated 6 years ago. I think you see it with a lot of teams, though, that kind of not live beyond their means, but kind of were used to Premier League football for so many years, and then got to that point where it was inevitable they were going to get relegated, and then they're in this situation where it's not looking great, and you're probably going to get relegated to League One. The likes of Blackburn and Charlton and Wolves. I mean, Wolves have turned it around now incredibly. They're a different side to what they were 5 years ago when they got relegated to League One. But Portsmouth as well. But Portsmouth was an entirely different story, really. But you see it with a lot of these teams who get relegated.
Blackburn's another. I think Blackburn's another one that's going through the same as well. And it's funny you mentioned Wolves there. You also mentioned obviously yourselves and the new ownership and things like that. I don't expect you to be an expert on Sunderland, of course. I totally get that, because me as a Sunderland fan, I know a lot about Sunderland and a little bit about everyone else. But do you think that's what Sunderland need from the outside perspective, from the outside looking in? Do you think it's just that the ownership is the one thing that needs to change to stop the club from basically ending up being a rotten corpse, which is what we feel like at the moment?
I mean, possibly, yeah. Obviously, Ellis Short wants to sell the club, and if I believe rightly, you nearly had a takeover recently, last year, was it?
Almost. I think the middle of some of those rumours of a German consortium, but he came out with some video which I didn't enjoy it. I didn't think much of it, where he said he felt like it wasn't within the best interests of the club to sell it to this German consortium. And if they're worse than Ellis Short, then they must have been pretty bloody bad, and I'll take his word for it. But no one seems to be coming in, to be honest with you. And the value of the club must surely be plummeting, because no one really goes anymore compared to, 27,000 is not no one, but it's a pretty empty stadium in comparison to what the stadium is and was. The fan base is apathetic. The players don't seem to give half a shit, half of them. We've basically got a bunch of young boys in the team who, it's not fair to have the pressure on 17, 18-year-olds. I can't see how it's a sellable asset. So I do worry that he's going to have to hold on to basically the ship for the foreseeable, which is pretty grim. But to answer your question, yeah, there was an attempt to take over, I thus believe.
Mm-hmm.
But
Yeah, I think
whether how serious they were, you don't know.
I think end of the day, you need an owner who's going to be passionate about the club 100%. Is going to be really involved with the club and be the focal point of the club, because everything stems from him. Finances and decisions on the manager and what players you can buy and other things like that. And I think as well as you've probably got a lot of high earners that don't want to be there, and you don't want them to be there. So that kind of plays into the apathetic atmosphere of the ground as well.
Jack Rodwell would be one of them. 70 grand a week, would you believe it?
Mm-hmm. Ridiculous.
It's ludicrous. And I think a lot of I spoke about that, I think last week. I can't remember if it was on the podcast. I can't remember if it was just in general conversation, but I spoke about it with Jack Rodwell. If you want to know why our clubs run badly, we just survived relegation under Poyet with that mad run towards the end of the season, getting a draw at Man City, beating Chelsea away, beating Man United away, and winning all our home games when we hadn't won all season. Mm-hmm. Then we signed Jack Rodwell in the summer. We give him 70 grand a week. We paid £10 million for a player who's played 12 games in 2 years without an idea of where he's going to fit. And we don't put a relegation clause into his contract, despite the fact we put it in everyone else's. Like Jermaine Defoe had one. Every player, as far as I'm aware, had a pay cut or something stipulated in their contract. Jack Rodwell, no. And now you've got a guy who sits there that literally admits, according to Chris Coleman, who I believe, he doesn't want to play for Sunderland anymore, which is just crazy, isn't it?
Mm-hmm.
Like, how does that happen? Did you have a similar level? Because I know a lot of your issues with Bolton were, as you said, financial, but did you have a similar kind of rotten core of players as well? We have this thing where it's a rotten core. I don't know how believable it is, but Rodwell's definitely part of something rotten. Did you have a similar kind of, I can't think of the word, but did your players basically act up a little bit and act like they didn't want to be at the club?
There was only one player really who falls into that category really, and that was Nigel Rio-Corker. He came on a free in 2011, and that season he was probably one of our better players, bit of a fan favourite really. And when we got relegated, it seemed like the majority of the players were going to stay and fight the cause and help the team get promoted back to the Premier League. Like players like Sam Ricketts and Zach Knight and Kevin Davis all signed extensions, and even Martin Petrov, who I think was still in contract, but he was showing no signs of leaving. Obviously, he was a quality player for the Championship until he left. But Nigel Rio-Corker had a relegation clause, like you were mentioning, Rodwell should have had. And within a couple of days of us getting relegated, he'd announced he was going to evoke that clause, and he was off, and he disappeared. And I think karma kind of came back to bite him a bit, because he then didn't find a club for 5 months and signed for Ipswich halfway into the season, which I think kind of brought a little joy to Bolton fans. But yeah, we didn't really have that kind of negative players. I don't think anyway, apart from Rio-Corker, who decidedly didn't want to be there, and I don't know whether that annoyed some Bolton players at the time or not, that he just kind of didn't want to fight the cause and disappear. But yeah, I don't think there was that group of players who were openly negative and didn't want to play for Bolton.
Yeah, we've got quite a few of them. If what you're told is to be believed, but I think actions do sometimes speak louder than rumours or words. So I suppose bringing you into Bolton now, and this is all within Sunderland in mind as well, because I think Bolton have had a big transitional period. We're talking about stuff in the past here and stuff that has happened to Bolton over the past 5 to 6 years, how it sort of came back, how it sort of reformed itself. But then you look at the first opening 3 months of the season, things were looking pretty dire for Bolton as a club. They're still not looking perfect. You're 20th, you're certainly in a healthier position than ourselves and Burton, I suppose. But the fan base as a whole, from an outside looking in with Bolton, seems to be in a little bit of a better place. Do you think, as a fan, you can stay in this league? Do you think you've got enough?
It's definitely achievable. I think a month ago, 90% of our fan base would have gone 100%, because we still had Madine leading the line. And I think that's still in a lot of fans' minds, that Madine if we had Madine still, I think staying up would have been a certainty the way we're playing. And now it's up to Phil Parkinson to find that right formula to make it work. I mean, we've been linked with a few, if you can describe them, target man strikers like Victor and Ichibi and Anthony Stokes, and we've had Maro and Shamak on trial. Obviously, kind of players who biggish names for the championship, but whether or not they'd be fit enough or fit into the style Phil Parkinson wants to play remains to be seen. So I don't know, but it's up to him to try and find the right tactics to keep us up. And I think a lot of fans have. I mean, after the result yesterday, you get this negativity with Bolton. You know, they kind of jump straight. Oh, we lose a game, and then it's end of the world, and we're definitely going down, and we're not going to win till April. Or some fans are down in the dumps after one loss or two losses in a row. So it probably depends game by game. If we get the win on Tuesday, you'll probably see a lot of fans a little bit more confident about staying up. But it's definitely achievable, I think.
It's funny you mentioned two former Sunderland players there, literally polar opposite opinions on both of them, Victor Anichebe and Anthony Stokes. Now, Anichebe, I did read the rumours of Anichebe coming. I think, in hindsight, when you look at the players that Sunderland have brought in, James Vaughan, who's obviously now gone to Wigan because he was absolutely awful. Graben obviously did a job, but he's gone. We've got the boy in on loan from Middlesbrough, Ashley Fletcher at the moment, which
ex-Bolton player.
I don't want to jump down his throat after 3 games, but he's not much. In hindsight, Anichebe would have been great for this division. It's literally his fitness levels. Has he? And this is terrible. I don't know this, but once I leave Sunderland, sometimes that you forget, especially when they go to China. So is he being released from China, or is he?
Yeah, I think he left. Beijing Enterprise, or some
right.
other. I think that's what they were called. I think he only played 12 times for him though. So and I think there's some problem. The local news reporter said there's some problem with his registration or something. So I don't know whether or not he can even sign for a club until the start of next season anyway. So yeah, it's always a risk anyway when a player leaves a place like China. You don't know if they've been keeping up with the fitness levels. You don't know whether or not they'll be able to adapt back into, because he's never played in the championship.
No, so and with Anichebe as well, like he seemed to come in and like he was a bit of a joke signing when he first came into Sunderland. It was like David Moyes found anything from 2003 with an Everton shirt and decided to sign it. And he was one of them. So he was great for us. And we had a front three of Anichebe, Defoe, and Watmore, and obviously Watmore, who's again got a cruciate ligament injury, really started coming to his own. And you had Anichebe like on the left hand side, who was like the pace and the power, and you had Jermaine Defoe, who effectively he's God, isn't he? He's brilliant. And Anichebe did really well, and when he got injured, that's kind of when we faltered. And by the time he came back, we were pretty much relegated. And I think in hindsight, probably for both of us, he would have been a good guy to keep on board, because rather than wasting the 500,000 on James Vaughan and having to make do with loan signings, we could have had someone like Anichebe bringing through the likes of Josh Madger and Joel Asoro. So I think if you picked up Anichebe, I don't think he's a downgrade on Gary Madine at all. Just probably another player that needs to build up his reputation, I suppose. Again, very much in the same way Gary Madine did, but for very different reasons, I suppose. But
very different reasons.
Yeah, Anthony Stokes, it's a bit of a weird one. I mean, I live in Glasgow, so he's well liked at Celtic. He didn't do much for us. He was at Blackburn, I think, last time I checked. Is that right?
Yeah, and I think he kind of flopped last season in the Championship, so I think fans would be sceptical about signing him. But I think that it's a rumour anyway that kind of died down as soon as it was kind of put in the papers. So I don't think there's anything in that really.
Yeah, I mean, Anichebe would, in my opinion, be considerably a better signing. But I suppose on the flip side, somebody like Anthony Stokes with a bit of a chip on his shoulder, admittedly a bit of arrogance, is sometimes what you need in a relegation battle. And I know people might disagree with me on that, but sometimes someone with a bit of character kind of ignites the place, doesn't it? But I think from an outside looking in, Bolton have more of a team ethic rather than sort of superstars, I think. So maybe he wouldn't fit. I suppose which brings me on to Sunderland, and someone said last week I should stop asking our guests which player would you take from Sunderland. I think that's because none of you want any of them, if I'm honest with you. So I'm going to change my question ever so slightly. Is there anything about Sunderland that worries you on Tuesday?
I think the game against Bristol worries me because obviously, you kind of speaking about the fan base and how you kind of resigned to relegation. But I think that coming down back from 3-0 down against a side like Bristol away from home kind of shows that little bit of tenacity and a little bit of fight. And that definitely worries me because when a team come and play with that kind of vigour against us, we kind of don't respond great. So yeah, I think that worries me a little bit.
In terms of sort of the management, Chris Coleman, I know, has got a little bit of stick on Saturday. Not so much from me. I was asking, obviously, if maybe because he says the right thing, does he get off a little bit lighter? But I think that was just in the anger of Saturday. I think Chris Coleman is definitely the right man in charge. But I was reading just through Twitter just to kind of like read through other teams' opinions on Chris Coleman, and everyone's been quite supportive of Chris Coleman, apart from a Bristol City fan who said we should have kept Simon Grayson, which I wholeheartedly disagree with. But did you expect Sunderland to be one of those teams to get out of it when we got Coleman from a Bolton perspective?
In truth, no, because it had been obviously done fantastically well with Wales. But it had been so long since he'd had a club job, and coming into especially a side like Sunderland, who've got all the issues off field and on the field, and really apathetic fans who, make that toxic atmosphere at home. It was kind of a risky move on his part to join, to become the manager of Sunderland. I mean, he's done a decent job so far, but I think it would have been tough for any manager to go in and turn it around, completely straight away. So I think it's too early to tell whether or not he's a really good appointment. If you stay up, he's done the job and all that. But I think at the time I kind of saw it as a little bit of a risk on his part and a little bit of risk on Sunderland's part, because he'd spent so many years away from club football, and just Sunderland seemed like one of the worst jobs to take in England at that time. So, yeah,
still is. If I'm honest with you, I mean, I love them more than anything. Obviously, I wish I could change my stripes sometimes, but that you'll know as well as I do, you just can't. It's not in the fans' remit to do that. It's not what happens. But I like him a lot, and I think he speaks an awful lot of sense, but his hands are just so tied. He's either got the choice of like a 17 or 18-year-old young boy who's learning his trade and starting to come into like a really tough league, which is tough, from a physical perspective and also mental perspective, and also the position we're in is tough mentally as well. Or he's got someone who doesn't really want to be here, and I think it's frustrating. He's got people like Kone, and he had previously, before he went on loan, Didier and Dong. And he sort of put that gauntlet down and said, yeah, fair enough, maybe you are Premiership players. Maybe you do want moves away, but you haven't played that well for the best part of a year. Go and prove that you deserve a Premiership move. And that's the right thing to say, 100%, but they still don't perform. I mean, Coney's been injured for a little while, but he came back in against Birmingham and we were 3-0 down, just after half time. It's a bit of a joke, really. Didn't perform very well, got injured and then limped out of the game. And you've got the likes of sort of Billy Jones and Aidan McGeady, who just kind of sulk around and don't really do much. I don't know how he fixes something when he's got no tools at his disposal. I'm starting to even look back at Simon Grayson and feel a bit sorry for him, which I really wasn't a fan of Simon Grayson. Did you have a differing opinion of our appointment of Grayson? I spoke to a fan last week who fully understood the Coleman situation and fully understood why Grayson went. But then when I spoke to a Bristol City fan, he said we should have kept Grayson. Again, like I say, I disagree with that. But when he first came in, I've asked a few people what their thoughts were. Like, was he a good appointment? And it's been quite mixed. Did you think he would have been a good appointment when he came in, or did you have a similar opinion to Sunderland are a little bit manageable? His hands are tied. It doesn't matter who we bring in.
I think, yeah, it's a little bit of that. I think it was quite a shrewd appointment, really, because he kind of done a solid job a couple of teams like Preston and Leeds in the Championship, so he kind of had the pedigree of keeping teams up in the Championship at least. I don't know how big aspirations were for Sunderland. I don't know if behind the scenes they were definitely deciding on promotion, or if an appointment like Grayson kind of, was just, we need to be middle of the road, stick in the mud, stay in the Championship at all costs kind of appointment. But he'd done a job. But obviously, at other teams, obviously it just didn't work out at Sunderland. But I think there's more mitigating factors for that, and you can understand why you went for a manager like Coleman after him.
Yeah, I think a lot of fans felt it just wasn't the right fit, because when it comes to Sunderland, there's a certain level of managers who do well, and it's the ones who understand the area and say the right things, i.e. Allardyce, i.e. Peter Reid, i.e. Mick McCarthy even did really well with us, although he came down with 15 points. He got us promoted after we were quite demoralised, and it's a lot about personality, and Coleman definitely has that, and I'm still hopeful that he will turn it around, but it just doesn't seem to sort of be working for us, really. So, moving on to, obviously, the game on Tuesday, I think for Sunderland's perspective, I think if we lose it, and I know there's a lot more games, but I think if we lose it, I think that's us done, if I'm honest with you. I think even a draw potentially is us done. But I always like to end the podcast on maybe a bit of an obvious one. But what are your thoughts for the game on Tuesday?
I think... similar to what you said. I think whoever wins the game, really, I think probably has the chance of staying up, and whoever comes away with no points is probably going to the team that goes down. I think it's that season-defining game for both sides, because we're kind of in a rut at the minute. So if we lose again on Tuesday, I think that rut may continue. And if you get the win, it might, after the draw against Bristol, a couple of weeks ago, it might reinvigorate your season. You might go on to have a really fantastic run. So I think, I'm not the most confident for the game on Tuesday, but if we somehow come away with the win, I'll be a bit more confident about how the season progresses.
Yeah, and I think I don't let it go against my own team, but I don't think it really matters. I don't see us picking anything up. As good as my memories are of Bolton, I've never seen us actually lose or drop a point at Bolton, actually, come to think of it. I've seen us win in the last minute, seen us win on the first day, and I've seen us win a few years ago when Sessegnon and Bentner scored. But I don't see anything in the club, let alone the team at the moment. I think there'll be another sort of knock on the door of relegation for us, unfortunately. And I really hope I'm wrong. I've tried to be positive as I can the past few weeks, but I think, if I'm coming from a neutral perspective, which I'll try, it'll probably end up being a draw, which is no good to any of us, realistically. No. But that's kind of where the Championship goes. It might say exciting, but yeah, Eddie, thanks for coming on. It's good to hear a fan and do a podcast with someone who's kind of been through, I think, what we're going to go through. And I wouldn't say Phoenix rising from the flames, but you've certainly rose back, and you're competing again, and you don't hate watching your football club or feel depressed doing it. So we've only got to hope that we're going to do exactly the same, Eddie. But thanks so much for coming on. I hope you don't have a good Tuesday night. I think understandably so, but good luck for the rest of the season. And thanks as always, mate. All right.
Yeah, thanks for having me on.
Anytime, mate. Not a problem at all. So that's the end of the Sunderland Bolton preview. I think quite interesting to speak to a Bolton fan from a perspective of being down into League One, having those financial restraints, so on, so forth, which I think is where we're going to be going. I think we know we're skint. I think we know we're going down, win on Tuesday maybe, but there's still so much work to do. I think we need to win 5 or 6 games minimum to get out of this, and I think we've only won 5 games in the Championship so far, so I why that would change, I don't know. But I hope we do. I'll still be there. I'll still hope that we pull it back. I'll still hope that something happens. But it's nice to hear someone who's gone down there and had similar financial restraints, similar shit happened to them to an extent, and have rose back from it and been a competitive football team that can go into a league that's of a decent standard and win football games and have a little bit of hope and have a little bit of vigor and a little bit of something about their football club again. I can only hope that that's something that happens with Sunderland, and sooner rather than later. But yeah, I'll be back obviously again sometime this week with a Middlesbrough podcast. I'll be speaking to a Borough fan, which I'm sure will be a little bit exciting. They'll probably show a lot of vitriol towards us because they hate us, and I'll probably not care too much because it's Borough and no one really cares about Borough. But yeah, thanks very much.